unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with even 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Good morning. Happy New Year, everyone. First Dharma talk of 2022. And I'm going to begin it entirely differently from how I had planned on it earlier this morning, because a couple of things occurred that I found interesting. One is just now, as we were chanting the three refuges, I forgot the third one. I couldn't remember for a moment, and thankfully Nate, our president technician here, remembered, and when I heard him begin, I remembered what it was. The reason I forgot the third one is I was caught by that phrase, before all being, or beings. It's said both ways. Usually it's before all being. You know, just the awesome implications of that line. That, you know, we're taking refuge in the three treasures, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and to do so, we place ourselves before all being. We present ourselves, make ourselves present, present ourselves to all being. It's an awesome thing. It's an awesome fact. It may not seem like a fact, it may seem a pure fantasy maybe, but we've been talking about the notion of return in the past few Dharma talks. And one of the implications of the return is to return to the source of being, as it's emerging from emptiness, here, now, here. And so one consequence or implication of the return is to do exactly that, to place yourself before all being. Because when your awareness is on point with the arising of phenomenal experience, the whole universe arises as the sound on Main Street, as the person you're talking to. When you're really present in the arising of phenomena, when you, as Dogen says, when you practice intimately and return to where you are, an interesting phrase, return to where you already are, that is placing yourself, presenting yourself before all being. That's one of the characteristics of return. And so that phrase, before all being, kind of caught my awareness for a moment, and I forgot where I was. I forgot which is part of returning. You return to where, you don't know where you are when you return, but that comes later. So that phrase, before all being, is awesome. And it provides one of the pointers for practice. Another thing that struck me this morning that I wanted to speak of, as I was putting on my kesa, I flashed back to some time ago. I had to untie it and try to put it back on again, and I forgot how. Which way does this flip? my, I put this robe on so many times, and so there's a lot of habit energy, a lot of conditioning of how it goes on to where I can put it on without much thought. But when I applied thought to it, I forgot how. And it was a real kind of a disorienting moment. I was sitting in the seat actually when it occurred, and I just couldn't remember the next gesture, the next step to put it on. That didn't happen this morning, but for some reason, as I was putting on the Ikesa this morning, the memory of that occasion reared its head, if you will. And there's something disorienting, something uncomfortable about stepping outside of our conditioning, our habit energy. Something very significantly disorienting and uncomfortable. We can get kind of cozy with our habit routines. The downside of that coziness is a sense of isolation. We're stuck within our own patterns of behavior and thought, and we don't even realize how estranged we are from the rest of life outside of our subjectivity when we're caught in the machinations of habit. But there's also this cozy factor. It's familiar, no big surprises when we just let our habit energy play out. And to drop that, it can be disorienting. We don't know what's going on. We don't know who we are anymore. And that can be awesome. I've used the word awesome a number of times. That's kind of like a theme for the beginning, at least, of this morning's Dharma talk. Because there's something important about awe. Awe is a specific category of human experience that it's a threshold experience. Blaise Pascal, contemporary of Descartes, French mathematician, inventor, philosopher, and later in life theologian. He once said that the eternal silence of infinite spaces terrifies me. And he goes on to say that when I consider the limitless time before I was born and the limitless time after I die, my own lifespan seems of no significance or of little significance. And so those two reflections are related. And I have a soft spot in my heart for Pascal. I think the terror that he experienced is indicative of a very sensitive soul. And yet, later in life, he came up with this wager, Pascal's wager, that, if I bet on God, if I'm wrong, big deal. If I'm right, I get heaven. But if I don't bet on God, the consequences might be dire. Not a very deep thought. So, I feel like he had the sensitivity to encounter the awesome reality of limitless cosmos. But he didn't have the tenacity of spirit to hang out there. He created a more comfortable fable. That's my feeling. That's my judgment, which may not be fair. But still, a sensitive soul. He had some very interesting things to say. His wager is not his high point, I think. My particular feeling. But I have a soft spot for him because I know that feeling. When I've told this tale before, of, as a young monk, doing town trips to and fro Tassajara, that 15-mile windy dirt road. One night, it was late at night, it was dark, no moon. I had this notion, let's stop at Lime Point, this place on the road where the mountains open up and you can see a fairly decent expanse of sky. Let's look at the night sky. I got out of the truck, and the immensity of what was before me freaked me out. I said, no, I'm not hanging out here, and I hopped back into the truck. And I could be wrong, but I think that's what Pascal experienced in that famous phrase, the eternal silence of infinite spaces fills me with dread, fills me with awe. See, that's the thing, the word awe. Etymologically, it can mean terror, like his awful swift sword. You know, awesome, awful, they share a root. You know, the word awesome has been trivialized in the 20th, 21st century. Things that people call awesome don't merit the word because they're not very scary. But actual encounters of awe, there's a bit of fear there, because in the encounter with true being, the illusion of self is shattered, as it was for Pascal. And in Buddha Dharma, that's a good thing. You know, that's part of awakening. But there's an element of fear in the process of awakening. Our cherished separate self has no purchase in awakening. The only purchase it has is an obvious illusion. And it takes a certain tenacity, it takes a certain resiliency to stay there. But it's worth it, it's worth it. It's hard to describe why it's worth it, but you know, I love the night sky. And I love amateur astronomy. I love getting out with my telescope and being awed by the immensity of what's right here, right now. But I'm not always up for doing that, because I know that, you know, if I succeed in encountering, you know, what I intend to encounter by practicing amateur astronomy, I'm going to encounter awe, and there's a measure of disorientation. There's a measure of discomfort, of being pulled out of your daydream of self and other, because self is reduced to a speck of almost nothing, or maybe nothing if things go well in the encounter with awe. And so, you know, it takes I have to be up for it in order to go out there at night with a telescope and look at things that are, you know, sometimes light years away, but they're right here at the same time, and feel the enormity, the immensity of being. To place myself before all being, to get back to that verse, you know, it takes a certain resiliency and a certain willingness to abandon comfort of habit. And the same is true of Zazen. If, you know, sometimes in my younger years, you know, people would be like sesshin junkies. They want to go to sesshin, and they don't want to be assigned to kitchen duty during sesshin. They want to be in the zendo. And I would say, sometimes audibly to other people, it says, well, they must not be doing it right. If they love Zazen that much, they must not be doing it right. They've found some sort of evasion from actually confronting the self. There's a certain amount of awe to actually do Zazen as Zazen. And so, if you're always happy to sit, you might not actually be doing it right. You may not actually be confronting the nature of the self and the disorientation of recognizing that what you think you are, what you think your life is, might just be a pure fabrication, and something else ungraspable and immense might be knocking, wanting some access to your heart and mind. You know? And so that is an appropriate occasion for awe, in the sense of trepidation. You know, oh, can I deal with this? You know, because you know, awe has that aspect to it, but it has the aspect of a threshold. It has the aspect of a completely different order of being from the everyday, from the habitual, from the routine, from the conditioned, from the presumptions we make about who we are and what our life is about. It's a threshold. You know, step over here and you'll see something different. And so there's trepidation, but also enticement. That's not the best word, but something of that nature. There's also kind of, wow, what is that like? You know, that realm of no self, of being before all being, arising before all being as all being. What is that actually like? Because you can get it in moments of awe, which is a basic human category of experience. In moments of awe, you get a whiff of that. That there's more going on than we habitually consider is going on. You know. So those moments of awe, they're not an arrival point. You know, you don't grab onto the experience and think, now I've got something. But they're intimations of a different way of being. And that when we return, when we practice the return, we're orienting ourselves in the direction of that order of being. You know, it's a different order of being. I can't stress that enough, and I don't know how to stress it. You know, Martin Buber talks about that a lot when he says the I of the basic word I-you is different from the I of the basic word I-it. It's a different I. It's a different self. It's a different order of being. And awe is kind of like, look, there's more going on than your routine, than your life routine, and something very important going on. That it takes some resiliency to face it, but it's more true. In Buddha Dharma, it's considered more true than the delusion of subject and object, of a separate self. So, that's some of the stuff that I didn't know I was going to be talking about until like 15 minutes before the Dharma talk. Or actually sooner than that, when I was putting on the robe. It all kind of, my well-laid plan unraveled a little bit. But anyway, we're still on the topic of return, and a little bit of recap. I began this by talking about wayfaring, and mentioned how Rib Anderson one day, in the context of a class, said, what would it be like to get out of bed and everywhere you look, you see way. You see the way, that you're oriented in such a way that everything is just an indicator of the way. And he said it with such emphasis, such intensity, that I felt like he was saying something that he felt was very important to him and wanted to share that there is a way to orient one's psyche, that, you know, that way-seeking mind is just present and operative and finds information on how to navigate the way everywhere one looks. That you know, that is a possibility. And so we start talking about wayfaring. And one of the first things that we talked about is, well, what's the motion of the way? Referring to one of the chapters of Lao Tzu, Tao Te Ching, where he says, return is the motion of the way. Yielding, not the best word. Transparency, receptivity is the activity of the way. The 10,000 things are born from being. Being is born from non-being. Another way to that last couplet, the 10,000 things are born from being. Whatever phenomenal expression that arises from emptiness, that arises right now, in its arising, is itself true being, an instantiation of true being. That's the 10,000 things are born from being. Each thing is true being in its arising, in its presence in the here and now, which is always changing. So that chapter of the Tao Te Ching, those 4 little lines say a heck of a lot. You know. So that's a good shorthand for wayfaring. You know, if you say, well, what is the way? Then, you know, refer to that chapter. I think it's chapter 10, I'm not sure, but it's the shortest chapter of the whole book, and it's the most packed chapter of the whole book. You know, return, that notion of return, it's an immense notion. It's a trans tradition, you know, in Judaism, in Islam, in Christianity. You know, Jesus of Nazareth had the prodigal son tale, where, you know, the son returns to the father, and he's not forgiven. He just had to learn to forgive himself. And then there's, you know, all we like sheep have gone astray, and so we need to come back. So this notion of return, pun intended, is pivotal in spiritual practice. Pan traditions. It props up everywhere. And so return is the direction of wayfaring. That's the destination. The destination is to return to where you are. There's a paradoxical notion. That's Dogen. It's a paradoxical notion. Where do we return to? Where we already are. But in our minds, we've been elsewhere. Return is the destination of the way. Yielding, transparency, receiving, just simply receiving what actually is present. Not trying to manipulate it, get away from it, change it, but receive what actually is arising is the activity of the way. You know, that's how we make the return, is we yield in this sense of no agenda, but an aspiration to clearly see what is actually arising from emptiness, what is arising from non-being, what is arising now, here, now. And then the 10,000 things, each one of them is an instantiation of actual being. How could they be otherwise? They are. And actual being arises from non-being. Actual being arises from emptiness in the now and the here. Now you take the word now and you take the word here, and you push them together, you get nowhere, right? Now, here's nowhere. So, the true being arises from emptiness. True being arises right here, right now, and it's always changing. So that chapter is a good shorthand schema of what wayfaring consists of. Let's look at in some detail about what Dogen says about the return. This is in Genjo Koan, which the majority opinion is it's his magnum opus, his greatest work in Shobogenzo. And he starts with a illustration of the basic situation, an image, if you will. He says, when you ride in a boat and watch the shore, you might assume that the shore is moving. But when you keep your eyes closely on the boat, you can see that the boat moves. Okay, it's talking about a perceptual error. Somewhat analogous to, if you're parking in a Family Fresh parking lot, you stopped your car right at the time that the guy next to you is starting to back out, and you think, oh my goodness, I didn't stop, But no, you've made a perceptual error. You're assuming the car is moving when it's not, because you made a perceptual error. And so, they didn't have Family Fresh or cars in Dogen's day, so he talks about boats and shores, but it's the exact same perceptual error. You make a false imputation based on what you see, but you misinterpret what you're seeing. Similarly, Dogen says, if you examine myriad things with a confused body and mind, you might suppose that your mind and nature are permanent. When you practice intimately, and there's this phrase, return to where you are, it will be clear that nothing at all has unchanging self. So, this notion of a subject carrying itself around, experiencing objects, is a perceptual error. It's an error analogous to the perceptual error. They're just ideas. Memory and anticipation creates ideas that have no substance to them. But if we allow habit to generate our awareness, our life energy, we will tend to see this self that is a mirage created by nothing but ideas and concepts. There's no there. But when you practice intimately and return to the nowhere of now here, you will see that nothing at all has unchanging self. You will see that phenomena are just phenomena. That's all they are. So, phenomena of eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, that's the Buddhist categorization of sources of phenomena, are all of the same ontological status. There's a fancy philosophical way of saying it, which means that the sound of that car on Main Street is of the same species as a thought. Neither one is more self than the other. Neither one is less self than the other. They're all just phenomena, constantly changing. That's the actual nature of the self, is the arising of phenomenal experience. And in the here and now, that's all it is. It's conjecture and ideation that create more. And that creating that more creates an isolation from the actuality of being. So if Pascal could have seen that infinite space as just his life arising, then the fear of letting go of self might not have been such a problem for him. It's always awesome. It's always awesome. It's always provocative of anxiety and trepidation to abandon this precious notion of identity, of personality. But it's not fatal. The mind might, the ego thing, it's fatal to the ego, at least temporarily, because it'll reassert itself at a future occasion. But in the moment of the encounter, in order to withstand the awe and walk through that threshold and be before all being, well, the illusion of the ego needs to dissipate for that realization. So, it takes resiliency to practice wayfaring, to practice Zen, to practice the return. It takes resiliency to withstand the fullness of being, which is inscrutable, uncanny. There's something uncanny about life in its raw reality. We'd much rather watch Netflix and deal with that a lot of the time. But the one aspect of the return, the gruesome, awful, in the full sense of the word awful, filled with awe, the gruesome, awful aspect of the return is to turn off the Netflix and encounter the ultimate uncanniness of the fact that you're here and you're alive in this limitless cosmos. Deal with that. That's part of the return, is you got to learn how to deal with that, and it's not easy, as Pascal demonstrated for us. Okay, another thing that Dogen says in Genjo Koan is towards the end of it. He says, here is the place. Here the way unfolds. The boundary of realization is not distinct, for the realization comes forth simultaneously with realization of Buddha Dharma. Okay, so it's ceaseless change. There's no there that you can put up on your shelf and say that's what it is. It's not distinct. One moment it could be a lovely sound of a bird. Next moment it could be a startling horn honk. Next moment it could be a dreadful thought. The source of now here is nowhere. There's no there. It's not, the boundary, the realization is not distinct. The threshold has no specific markings on it. There's no particular experience we're looking for. There's no particular experience we're looking for. That's not what the return is about. It's about yielding. It's about openness to whatever wants to arise. As Suzuki Roshi said, if the Buddha comes, we welcome him. If the devil comes, we welcome him. The boundary of realization is not distinct. There are no markers for what it is like to be before all being, because it's, nothing at all has unchanging self. It's always fresh and new, novel. Okay, he goes on to say, do not suppose that what you attain becomes your knowledge and is grasped by your intellect. Although actualized immediately, what is inconceivable may not be apparent. Its emergence is beyond knowledge, which is kind of a reiteration of the same point. What we realize is not how sweet the bird is singing. What we realize is not any particular experience. What we realize is the inconceivable. We can't conceive of it, we cannot grasp it, we cannot get a hold of it. It's a profound disorientation that comes from the relinquishment of habit energy. But that disorientation allows actual being to arise in awareness. But it's not something that you can know as an attained datum of information or knowledge. So that's, do not suppose that what you attain becomes knowledge and is grasped by your consciousness. Although actualized immediately, the inconceivable may not be apparent. Its experience, its emergence is beyond knowledge. So it's now here, nowhere, there's no there. It's not any particular experience. It's a source from all experience, including the shitty ones. And if we can realize that, the shitty ones aren't quite as difficult to bear, because we don't slap a self on top of them. So that's part of what's being offered in this awesome, awful encounter, is immense freedom. Immense freedom. Which leads us to the last reading for this morning. I didn't know if I'd get to it, but we have time. So this is Martin Buber, I and Thou, speaking of returning. In the Hebrew tradition, the word return is teshuvah, and it's a profound word in the Hebrew tradition. It's just turn around, like I said before, just turn around. It's not repentance in the connotations we give the word repentance of self-punishment, self-flagellation, but simply turning around, simply pivoting back to the source, return to the source. Teshuvah has that meaning. Return, O Israel, and your God will return to you. Just return, just turn back to the source. And so this is him talking about return. I and Thou is filled with a lot of wonderful language. Buber loves language. And in this section, he lets it all, he lets it all go. So in this, there's a little orientation, a little, setting the stage so that this is comprehensible. He talks about a dogma of running down. A dogma of running down is like unlimited causality. It's like being a plaything of causes and conditions, being a plaything of your karma. One illustration of this is the Zen master says to a student, you know what the difference between you and I is? No, what is the difference? Well, you are turned by the 24 hours, whereas I turn the 24 hours. So this dogma of some running down is being turned by conditions, by 24 hours. So that's, in a nutshell, that's how to understand the reference to a dogma of some running down. Okay, so here is the passage. The dogma of a gradual running down represents man's abdication in the face of the proliferating it world. Now, that's Buber terminology, the it world. Subject, object, the prapanka, the proliferation of subjectivity. That's what he means by the proliferating it world. The dogma of a gradual running down represents the human's abdication, giving up in the face of karma. Okay, I'm a plaything of the cosmos. Okay, I accept it. Here the name of fate is misused. Fate is no bell that has been jammed down over man. Nobody encounters it except those who started out from freedom. But the dogma of some running down leaves no room for freedom. Or, for its most, I get emotional when I read this. I don't know if you're going to get it at all, but whenever I read it, it gets to me. Because it's dense philosophical literature, that's what I mean, but it's profound at the same time. The dogma of some running down leaves no room for freedom or for its most real revelation, whose tranquil strength renews the countenance of the earth, returning. The dogma does not know the human being who overcomes the universal struggle by returning, who tears the web of tribes by returning, who by returning stirs up, rejuvenates, and changes the secure historical forms. The dogma of running down offers you only one choice as you face its game: to observe the rules or drop out. But he that returns knocks over the man on the board. The dogma will at most permit you to carry out conditionality with your life and remain free in your soul, but he that returns considers this freedom the most ignominious slavery. Nothing can doom man but the belief in doom, for this prevents the movement of return. So Buber can be very eloquent, and he just lets out all the stops in this passage. You know, it's really, really lyrical, and it's very, you know, it kind of like his way of praising with, you know, full-throated praise of turning around. That this simple little thing, practice intimately, return to where you are, has the most profound consequences for a human life. It renews the countenance of the earth. You're at the fount of creation. You're at Zeron. You're at where true being is popping up perpetually. And all of the conditions, all of the limitations, yeah, they're there, but so what? You know, you've knocked the pieces off the board. You know, you've entered a realm of being that's of a different order of being than conditionality. And so, even though you're still subject to conditionality, it doesn't define you in the fullness of your being. And so, this passage, which is, you know, it's abstruse in its language, but profound in what it's trying to say, is a paean of praise to the simple practice of return. That if you return to the source, if you practice intimately, return to where you are, everything is fresh and new. And that fresh and new reality is in some sense more real than political machinations, interpersonal difficulties. They're there, but this different order of being has the reality that is in some sense more valid and gives resources for navigating delusion, navigating, you know, conditionality, that without encountering the true being that arises from emptiness, which is in semi-beginner's mind, when he talks about, you know, your effort should be directed towards nothing, the source of being. I lost my train of thought. But, so that's Buber praising return. And it's so simple. But to quote T.S. Eliot, it's so radically simple, but it's a condition of complete simplicity, costing not less than everything. You know, you got to abandon the precious self that we tend to cling to. So it's simple yet challenging, simple yet awesome. I want to leave you with one thought. You know, one of our Sangha members during seminar expressed some gratitude that she now has the realization that her practice is always there, available whenever she needs it. that's good news. And with sincere perseverance, you know, your practice can be a treasured resource. You know, it has this element of awe in the full sense of the word. You know, it takes courage to settle the self on the self and do the work of zazen, do the work of return, and see what arises, see what actually is in the heart and mind on each moment. You know, that can be gruesome. That can be gruesome work to actually see what's going on in your mind. You know, that's the intimate practice. But with gentle perseverance, there's a limitless resource available. When you need to, you can place yourself before all being and be supported by the full cosmos. That's a possibility. It takes work, but with perseverance, that can be a resource that when you need to, you can return